Hello and welcome to Positive Parenting. I'm Carly Youthy, Multimedia Specialist for the Sioux Falls School District. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, ready or not, it's flu season. It's the season that none of us look forward to, especially here at the Sioux Falls School District. In a recent study done by the Center for Disease Control, it was found that children are the most at risk for getting the flu. There's roughly 10% of kids ages 0 to 17 that are at risk for the flu. And so being at the Sioux Falls School District, where we educate over 24,000 students, the flu is always on the forefront of our mind. So that's why we are joined today by Health Services Coordinator Molly Satter, who is going to provide a little bit more insight about the flu, ways that we can prevent the flu, and how we're educating our kids about the flu. So Molly, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So let's start off. Let's talk about the flu itself. It seems like there's a lot of different strains of flu. You've got the different types of flu, you've got influenza. Can you kind of clarify what the flu really is?
Sure. So when we talk about influenza or the flu shot or the flu season that we're here to talk about today, that's really more of a respiratory type illness, high fever, body aches, those kind of things. Sometimes people will say flu and they really are talking maybe about the stomach flu too, and that's very different and more GI related. So those are the two different kinds. The influenza that we're going to talk about today comes in strains A and B, and then those actually change year to year in between or within those strains. So yeah.
And how is influenza spread? How are we seeing that? You know, it's kind of it becomes during I feel like it's certain times of the year that it really peaks. So how is that spread?
Yeah, so like I talked about, it is a respiratory illness, so it is through droplets. So when you cough, that is spread through the air and then breathed in by others, and then you end up sick too. So
sure. And how, I guess that being at a school like an elementary school where kids are constantly playing with the same toys and things like that, it seems like that's an easy way.
Yeah, anytime you're in close contact with others, you're going to have a better chance of picking something up, and so we really want to make sure that our kids are, doing the basics, washing their hands, that we're keeping our environment clean. We use hospital grade cleaners, our custodians do, and so just keeping your environment clean, washing your hands, using the basic cover your cough, with your arm.
Yep.
Teaching kids those kind of things can all play a role in preventing you from getting the flu.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so when I was getting ready for this and kind of looking at some of those numbers, there was that 10% ages 0 to 17. That's a huge portion of who's getting illnesses like this. Is there a reason in particular that in certain ages it's more prevalent than others? They always say like in kids and
the young and the old.
The young and the old, yeah.
Just those students can be more susceptible. Sometimes it has to do with your environment. Kids are around each other in a school, close environment, that kind of thing. And just sometimes their immunity at those ages are not optimal yet.
Yeah.
And so it can lead them to
Makes
picking
sense.
it up
Right.
a little more easily. Yeah.
Absolutely. How serious is influenza, the flu and influenza?
It's absolutely very serious. It can be. We have had students who have been hospitalized with it. I know locally of a family, and more than one, that have lost children due to the flu.
Wow.
And so it is serious, and we want to take it serious and help families to do everything they can to prevent from having to deal with something terrible like that.
So what are some of the signs that a parent should look for when questioning whether or not when their child is sick? What flu-like, influenza-like symptoms really sets it apart from other just kind of common cold type of sickness?
So really that high fever, the body aches, the cough, chills, those kind of things are going to more indicate flu. Where if you just have, a stuffy nose, no fever or low-grade fever, you're probably dealing with something that's more along the lines of a cold. But yeah, it's really going to be the high fever, body aches, those type of things.
So what would you do? What do you recommend if children are experiencing some of those symptoms? What action should a parent take? What should they do?
Always reaching out to your healthcare provider, having the child seen is always a good idea. depending on the year and what's going on, sometimes Tamiflu or medication can be given.
Sure.
And sometimes they don't recommend that, and it's just kind of a matter of treating the symptoms and working through it. But reaching out to your doctor to find that out is always the best first step.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's kind of segue into some preventative actions.
Yeah.
What are some steps that parents can take to really ensure that their kids aren't susceptible to
Sure.
get that?
So, just starting with basic health is a really good kind of starting point. Making sure you're eating properly, eating healthy foods, getting good sleep, all of those things that kind of put your health at the optimal level is going to give you a good starting point. And then doing things like we talked about, or we haven't talked about yet, but getting your flu shot, and then teaching them to, cough into their arm, wash their hands. They don't need to share every item with a friend, making sure that they, have their own separate space and items so that they're not sharing lots of things. So some of those are really good preventative things.
Yeah.
And obviously the flu shot, like I mentioned, is a big one in that.
Let's talk more about the flu shot. It seems like that is kind of one of the best preventative options, maybe.
Yeah.
What do you talk to us about the flu vaccine?
Sure.
What is it, and
Sure.
what is it exactly?
Yes, so there's a live and an inactive flu vaccine. The live is going to be the nasal mist that that they'd simply spray in the nose, and then the inactive or the flu shot is obviously an injection, and both of them are giving your body a hint of, or the virus, they're introducing the virus to your body so that it can then build up immunity, so that when you encounter the flu or influenza, you have that immunity built up. And so that's really kind of just in a basic form what that flu shot is. And getting one annually is strongly recommended. Getting that in October typically is the time frame when we want to get that. Flu can start in November. We can see it as early as, and they're even starting to see a few cases now, but
Sure.
And then it can really go up from there. So getting the shot in time so that you're properly immunized prior to that really ramping up. And it takes, they say, I think about 2 weeks from the time that you get your flu shot till you have that immunity built up. So getting that right away in the fall, and then that's really one of the best things you can do for yourself.
And how long does that last for? How long does the flu shot typically? You say annually, but does it last that full year, or is it just last during the really important time?
If you look at the CDC, they reference several different reports that give different amounts of time, that each month you do lose a little bit of that immunity after, I think, the first 3 or 4 months. So that really gets you to kind of that March, April time frame. There's no need to get a second influenza shot. But so then it kind of gets you through the season when the flu starts to taper off, and then obviously you need another one the next year. But
Sure. I think the question on the forefront of every parent's mind is the flu vaccine safe?
Yes. In the studies, everything out there points to it being safe. There's really, people talk about getting the flu from the flu shot, and there's really nothing to support that, no research or evidence to support that. You may get a sore arm, you may get a little bit achy and, just feel a little bit off for a few days, but that's really an indication that immunity is starting to work.
Yep.
And so, so that's a positive thing. And then, so you really, there are much other than those pretty basic side effects that you have to worry about with getting the flu shot.
It might be obvious, but what are some of the benefits of getting the flu shot? You've mentioned a few of them. But
So just preventing becoming ill. And it's not just for yourself or the person who gets vaccinated, but the people around you, if you have the really young and the old that you are with, and that you're protecting yourself and others. So that's really the big benefits.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is important to talk about protecting yourself and others. There are others around you it's so important to do it, not just for yourself, but for those other people, which I've really found interesting, and that it doesn't maybe not everybody thinks about that all the time,
Yeah.
but there are like the older generation, like you might be around somebody who is older and more susceptible to that kind of sickness, and you could be carrying that and pass it on to them. So like a grandparent.
Yeah, and you think about, the holidays are coming up, and all of those times when you're around different people, and they may not, for various reasons, be able to get the flu shot, or their immunity might be lower for whatever reason, and so you're really helping protect them as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what would you say to a parent that might be hesitant to administer or get their child a flu vaccine? What would you tell them?
I would just visit with them and listen to them and learn about what their hesitancy is, provide any of the information that I could provide, the research based evidence to say that it is safe, that it is effective, and that it is helpful. And with regard to it being effective, some people say, well, it's not always a good match. They say that even without it being a perfect match, you're still going to get some benefit from that. So maybe you get the flu, but you don't end up in the hospital with the flu. So, it's beneficial no matter what.
Absolutely. What are some of the biggest hesitancies that you find that parents may have?
You hear that, well, the flu shot gave me the flu.
Sure.
It's not maybe going to be a good match and not cover it anyway. And a lot of times I think it's just people don't take the time, and they're busy. We're all busy.
Absolutely.
It just kind of slips their mind, and it doesn't happen. So we want to, that's why we're doing things like this and visiting with families all the time, and we're going out into our schools and doing flu shot clinics. So that we can get the word out there.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads me into my next question is, what do you tell a parent, where do they get a flu shot? I know we've held some flu shot clinics, but our last one is happening this week.
Yes.
So if they maybe missed this, talk to us a little bit about the flu shot clinics and then where they can go after that.
Yeah. So we provided flu shots at each of the middle and high school, flu shot clinics at each of the middle and high schools. We'll be wrapping those up this week. After that, they can go to their provider, their healthcare provider, and there's a lot of places in town I know that also provide the different pharmacies that provide the flu vaccine, but certainly always going to see your healthcare provider is good. I know there are a lot of options to do walk-in shot clinics, things like that. In the healthcare organizations do a good job of making sure there are lots of opportunities for families to be able to get in. So just a quick call or checking online to find out what those times and availabilities are, and getting in that way.
So cost of flu shots.
Yes.
Is what does that, are they free? Are they a low cost? Just I'm thinking about families that maybe don't have the financial means to get that taken care of.
So typically the flu shot is a VFC vaccine. So if a student is insured or uninsured or on Medicaid, that would be covered for them. And then most insurances cover preventative type care, and the flu shot often falls in line with that. But you'd have to check with your individual plan. And then we have some great resources in town. Falls Community Health is a wonderful resource where they have low and reduced cost care. And so that's typically on a sliding scale fee. So they're a great resource to utilize if you're concerned about cost.
Awesome. It seems like there's a lot of different outlets that if a family is interested in getting their child a flu shot, there are definitely ways and means to be able to get that done for them. So
and if there's any question too, our school nurses are always a great resource.
Sure.
If there's questions about the flu shot, about where to get it, concerns that parents might have, just asking your school nurse. They're very familiar with those. So
wonderful. Great. Is there anything I'm missing with the flu shot as far as the vaccine and things, preventative tips?
No, I mean, just again, the message of, doing all these preventative type things, including getting the flu shot. It's a good way to think about it is that, there are all these things, we are very busy, and there are all these things that kids are involved in, parents are involved in, activities, school, and we think about how hard it is to miss something, when you're out and sick for 5 days. It's very difficult to make up from that. And so, if nothing else, it's do it so that you don't have to miss out on all of those things. I mean, obviously no one wants to be sick, but that's another benefit to making sure you take good care of yourself and prevent that.
And when you are busy, it can be hard to stay healthy, to get a good night's sleep, to make sure you're eating well all the time. You're around a bunch of people all the time. So it's almost like you're more highly susceptible to getting sick. So not only are you more highly susceptible, but you're also then going to be missing out and have to try and make up on that time.
So take care of it on the front end. Take good care of yourself.
Exactly. So to kind of segue into, so let's say you did all the prevention you could, but a child still ended up with the flu. Obviously, we talk about all the time at the Sioux Falls School District how important attendance is. But when should we overlook attendance and say, okay, my child you need to stay home?
So if a child has been diagnosed with influenza, they need to be fever-free, symptom-free before they return to school, and fever-free for greater than 24 hours without the use of fever-reducing medication. So meaning you can't give Tylenol in the morning and send them out the door if they're still running a temp. So we want to make sure they're fever-free. And if parents have any questions regarding that, if they're kind of on the fence or should we send them or not, always calling your school nurse too. They can help you kind of walk through your particular scenario and determine what would be appropriate for the students. And working with your healthcare provider always, they're absolutely the experts on your child's care. So
absolutely. So let's say a student did come to school sick, exposing it to other students. What are some of the ways that those other students that maybe came in contact with a student who was sick, how can they maybe lessen their chances of getting sick?
So we just continue to reiterate all of the things that we talked about today, washing their hands and making sure that they've themselves had a flu shot, and just taking those measures really are the things that you can do if you know that you've encountered someone with the flu.
Sure. We kind of talked about it a little bit before this, but when does it seem like, I guess you kind of mentioned it too, getting that flu shot in the fall to kind of gear up for the busier season. But when is the busy season? So each year it kind of varies on where it starts to really ramp up.
Like I said, it can start as early as now, really picking up in November, December. The peak, I believe, is January, February typically. But then we've even had cases of influenza into April. So I mean, it's kind of a lot, it's several months, over the course of several months. And so making sure that you're, using those preventative measures well before we enter into that.
Have we seen any cases of the flu this year yet so far?
Not that I'm aware of in the Sioux Falls School District. I know the state report shows that as of last week, I believe there were roughly 4 cases that had been identified. So just a few out there, but that means it's coming and it will pick up.
How many what's typical for a typical year? How many flu cases? I mean, I'm sure it varies year to year, but what is kind of the average that we see?
In the Sioux Falls School District or in the state? So we don't, we don't have the numbers in the Sioux Falls School District. Obviously we don't test students, and parents we don't always have that confirmation of that, so I don't have numbers on that. And right offhand, I don't actually recall the total numbers last. I want to say this is just maybe 5,000.
Oh wow.
Maybe it's less than that, or more than that. Excuse me, statewide.
Sure. But still, that's significant. And do you notice that is it kids and kids in the older? Is that kind of where we're seeing the?
No, not necessarily. I mean, yes, you see a higher incidence of it in the elderly and the very young. And that's where they can get more sick with it. That's where you often see, when you hear of people being hospitalized, although that can happen at any age, you more often see it in the old and the young. But yeah, I mean, everyone's susceptible to getting it, so.
How long does it seem like, so when it does get to the point where they do have to go, a person does have to go to the hospital, what's the reasoning for the hospital, and how long does that usually last, or how long are they usually there for?
Well, that can vary depending on how ill they are, but really typically it's that respiratory. So a lot of times when you get influenza, you can get a secondary infection, which can be pneumonia. So then you're having breathing problems, and some people can end up on a ventilator and just very, very sick. And depending on the person's situation, they could be there for days to weeks even.
Sure. Wow. Yeah. How are we talking about the flu in schools? How are we teaching our kids to stay healthy?
Sure. So at each of the buildings, we're able to send out information to parents via the newsletter that I'm sure they're all familiar with. And so we make sure that there's information that goes out to parents that way. We have information on our website. Our nurses in the elementary level can go out and do a little germ teaching in the classroom about how to prevent from spreading germs and that kind of thing. So, from going into the classroom to making sure we have the message on social media to sending it out to parents through the newsletter are some of the bigger ways that we get the word out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to go back just a few minutes ago when we were talking about the flu vaccine. You mentioned that we do flu clinics in our middle schools and our high schools. Why don't we have them in our elementary schools?
Sure. That's a good question. I get asked that often. So years ago when we had the H1N1 epidemic, we did have shot clinics with the younger students and really learned that it was not a conducive environment to a good experience, I guess, for younger children to get the flu shot.
Sure.
They are just better served with their doctor in the doctor's office. Also with the younger students, if they've never had a flu shot before, they have to get 2 1 month apart, and that gets to be a little bit hard to manage and track all of that. So that's again why the healthcare provider would be able to make sure they get their first shot and then recall them and have them come back in for their second. So there are a variety of different reasons, but it's a better experience for the child to have that done with their healthcare provider.
So let's say there's a parent who maybe didn't didn't get their child the flu vaccine when they were K through 5 or just younger. Can they do it now in 6th grade, 7th grade? How does that work? Would they still have to do the 2-shot step, or
no? After age 8, then you're okay to just get the 1. But it's the children 8 and under that if they've never had one, they have to get 2 in that first season.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the flu and influenza. What are some of the, last year we had a lot of whooping cough.
Yes.
So what are some of the other sicknesses that could pop up this season?
Sure. Well, there's always, your run-of-the-mill colds. There's, GI flu that we talked a little bit about before, vomiting, diarrhea, those kind of things. Then we always see quite a lot of strep throat. And then, we did have cases of pertussis last year and more than we had seen for quite a while. So, there's just a lot out there, and making sure that you have taken all the steps to vaccinate yourself. I mean, obviously pertussis is one that you can be vaccinated against. Some of the other ones I just mentioned, you can't be. And so that's where it's kind of just putting all of those preventative measures, taking good care of yourself, washing your hands, getting vaccinated are all important.
Why do you think there was maybe that rise of pertussis cases that we had last year?
According to the CDC, there's different strains of that, just like there's different strains of the flu. And so there was a particular strain last year. Many of the students who actually got pertussis were vaccinated. But a good analogy in looking at that is instead of, we might have had 1 student per school with pertussis, and instead of it being 300 students in a school.
Right.
So the vaccine worked, but it's not 100%. And so, just like with the flu, and those students weren't severely ill like they could have been either. So, those things are out there, and we just have to.
Those vaccines help.
Yeah,
they really do.
Yeah.
So, and the cost outweighs. Wait, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah. The benefits.
outweigh the cost.
Yeah.
I'll not
leave it at that.
Yeah, we're gonna. Well, is there anything I missed about flu, influenza, any of these types of diseases that we see a lot during this time?
No, I mean, I think we talked about all of the, doing the preventative care, taking good care of yourself, getting immunized, reaching out if you have questions to a healthcare provider or your school nurse. And certainly, letting anyone know if you have questions, concerns, or those are the things that I think are most important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today and let us know about some of the prevention. And we encourage you guys to take the steps necessary to prevent yourself from your children getting the flu or you getting the flu or anything like that. So thank you so much for joining us today on Positive Parenting.